Welcome to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. This is Eva Richardson, and I'm joined by Rena Glazer.
Hi.
We were excited to see Pro Bono in the news last week. As many of you are probably aware, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said that all lawyers should be required to provide pro bono legal services. So she was giving remarks at the American Law Institute's annual meeting, and so she said, when it comes to improving access to justice for the poor, I believe in forced labor, quote unquote, and that if I had my way, I would make pro bono service a requirement. So her comments have generated a considerable amount of buzz over the past week, and we just kind of wanted to discuss the debate over mandatory pro bono and what we think here.
Yeah, so we're going to offer some quick hot takes on mandatory pro bono whenever this comes up or is in the news. It tends to break the internet and explode.
Yes.
So for those of you who may have missed it, thanks, Eva. I think that gives everyone a great set of background to inform the discussion. I wanted to start with the real question, which I think sometimes gets lost in the noise about mandatory pro bono. And that is, how do we meaningfully solve the access to justice crisis,
Right.
both on the civil side and now on the criminal side? And let's not be mistaken that universal or mandatory pro bono could ever do that.
Right.
Pro bono is a tool, and an important tool, and we work hard all day, every day,
Yes.
trying to increase pro bono and make it as meaningful and as effective and efficient and impactful as possible, but it will never be the solution to the access to justice problem. For that, we need resources, right?
Yep.
We need to fully fund legal services, and there's no getting around that. And pro bono will never plug that gap.
Right.
Totally. So I don't want to lose sight of the core solution, which we all know what it is, and the core value here, by in a way being a little distracted from the shiny light of mandatory pro bono. And we can think about how, in the real world, even to do more and more impactful pro bono, we need our legal services partners. So if we're gonna greatly increase our pro bono army, which we of course would love to see happen, they can't do more legal services, and we can't do more pro bono without our legal services partners, right? Pro bono matters. We can't just clap our hands and wave a wand and all of a sudden, poof, on my desk comes perfectly packaged an amazing pro bono project. This takes work. Clients need to be vetted and met and matched, and pro bono lawyers need to be trained and mentored and supervised, and all of that takes resources, right? So we have to work hard. We have to double down to make sure that the Legal Services Corporation is fully funded. That's not happening, and all the legal services providers, no matter their area of expertise and the area of poverty law that they are working in, has the resources they need. That's how we make the pro bono landscape work better and work better for our clients. They don't work separate and divorced from each other. And you can think about it, it makes sense just in any volunteer context. I mean, we are welcoming our summer volunteers next week, and they don't arrive just out of thin air, right? They have to be recruited and interviewed and selected, and then projects have to be arranged and crafted and explained, and they need to be nurtured, and then they need to be given feedback. Otherwise, it's babysitting, right? It's not making meaningful contributions to our work or obviously to clients and to the access to justice cause. And if we think back, and I don't really mean to dwell in confusing or frustrating nostalgia, but if we think back to the Great Recession and the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, 2010, you all may remember what happened with what we conveniently or as a shorthand called deferred associates, right? The markets crashed, there was the crisis in housing and banking, and for law firms, commercial work dried up and dried up very quickly. And law firm hiring, as you all may know, happens a year or two in advance, right? So law students who were set to graduate and start at firms that fall, suddenly there really wasn't work for this great influx of new attorneys. So firms deferred their start dates, which was called deferred associates. They said, you still have an offer, you may still come, but in a year, right? Take a gap year.
Yeah.
And you can go play golf, you can go sit on a beach, you can go practice your stand-up, you could go write the next great American novel, or maybe you would like to do some public interest work, right? Do some pro bono, develop some skills, contribute some good, and do something law related for the year, even while you're not working here at the firm. And this became a very big movement in the pro bono movement for law firms and for legal services organizations, because you couldn't just take all these recent law grads and plunk them somewhere, right? And expect them to be fully functional contributors to the mission and mandate of the organization. That took space. Where were they going to work, right? They need a desk, they need a computer, they need paper, they need pens, and they need supervision. And all of that took resources. So effective programs, and we study this both in real time and after the fact, required contributions from the sponsoring law firms to make this work, right? It takes resources to make this work. So I think this is another example of that, where the bottom line is we have to fund our legal services providers, and then we can help them build capacity and leverage their expertise through pro bono work. But you can't get around that core need, right, of a vital and functioning legal services community. So that's one hot take when we talk about the M word. We also like to talk about what the attitudinal push of mandates are, right?
Exactly.
People in general and lawyers in particular, and our friend Dr. Larry Richard at Lawyer Brain will tell us, don't like to be told what to do. And that's very true for lawyers. And I think if you followed any social media since last week, you saw a lot of pushback of, I'd rather surrender my law license than be told what to do, and involuntary servitude, no. And these are people who might otherwise be doing pro bono work, right? But when you feel like it's being rammed down your throat, that is an atmospheric that is hard to get around. And we'll come back to that in a few minutes, but that attitude does play a role. And yes, and I think Justice Sotomayor talked about this, that we're lawyers and we're going to live up to our professional responsibilities, and everything that we do is going to be done in compliance with our ethical rules. And I think that's definitely a noble aspiration. But there is a concern about the quality and competency of pro bono services being delivered. This is not make work. This is not mock work. This is vital, important legal work that affects critical functioning of human beings, right? Whether you're going to maintain custody of your children, whether you can stay in your house, whether you're going to get medical care that you need. It is critically important, and we can't be giving people second-class justice. And you do wonder if people feel like, I don't want to be doing this. Will they be doing a good job?
Will the quality suffer?
Right, just as a practical matter. Like, yes, as an aspiration, we're going to do an amazing job, but practically, I'm not sure. And we spend a lot of time just with people who have signed up for pro bono work, right, on quality control and supervision, and making sure that the pro bono work being done is of high quality and to the highest standards. And we know, unfortunately, sometimes it isn't, right? And we've had that here where people have done work for us and it's been, to quote our friends at Mad Men, not great, Bob, just not great. And we're human beings, we're all, not robots. So that will happen. But you do wonder if people feel really bitter about what they're being asked to do, whether they will embrace it in the spirit of quality and compassion and sensitivity and zealous advocacy that we need here. So I think that is a concern. There's also, and we're not going to belabor this because there are so many, pragmatic concerns, implementation concerns, right? Who would decide what counts? Right? As we administer a pro bono challenge, we spend a lot of time, right, deciding
so many questions.
What counts.
Exactly.
Right? Who's going to be the pro bono czar that decides this? That actually takes resources. These are not self-implementing. We deal, as you listeners know, with a pretty small slice of the profession, right? Large law firms. And actually, given the demographics of lawyers in this country, that is sort of a small segment, right?
Definitely.
It's who we are concerned about almost exclusively, but it's a small segment of the profession. And it's one thing to do as we do, work all day, every day, to encourage lawyers at large law firms to do pro bono. They have infrastructure and resources and delivery systems that make pro bono work. What about solo practitioners? What about unemployed lawyers?
Right.
What about underemployed lawyers, staff lawyers, contract lawyers, people who've taken time out from working to care for their family, to raise a family, people who are working in non-legal environments. They're working in business, they're working for startups, they're doing a host of things that lawyers can do, lawyers in academia, government lawyers. Lawyers who live in places where they are not admitted to the bar.
Right.
In-house lawyers. It's a very complicated legal landscape, and what it takes for each demographic to do pro bono really varies.
Yes, definitely.
And it's a big issue to overcome individual obstacles to participation. So this would require a lot of thinking and a lot of resources and a big effort. And one of the reasons, I think you heard us talk about this when we did our look back on the challenge, right? That we like to look at 3-year snapshots because we live complicated lives, as do law firms, and it's hard to expect a perfect balance each and every year, right? So if someone's in a personal crisis, can we really mandate that they do a certain amount of pro bono this year?
Exactly.
Physically, they may be ill, they may not be able to, and we have to be sensitive and treat people like people,
Right.
and keep that in mind.
Exactly.
And I think that was some of the noise about this, as people feel threatened by mandates, right? And that universal solutions sounds good, but they don't work for
Very
individuals.
hard to implement,
At times, and we want to be sensitive to that and to the difficulties there. Whether a pro bono mandate could work for an institution, I think is a good question, and one that we've talked about on the Pro Bono Happy Hour. So if that's something that's of interest to you, I don't think we should mine all of those plus and minuses and how difficult it is and the considerations and whether it's worth it. But I would encourage people, if you haven't already, to listen to the great episode with Kathy Ockrock from Blank Rome, who goes into some fantastic detail about how the firm decided to institute a mandatory pro bono policy, their considerations, the pluses, the minuses, and how it's going.
Right.
And
it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and Dave and Eva, you guys did a great job with that episode. And I think there's a lot of learning there. If this is an area that's piqued your interest because of current events or what you're hearing. And I think it raises a question, just to dial down this part of our discussion, and that is, if something is mandatory, what are the consequences for non-performance? Right? And Kathy talks a little bit about that. At a firm level, you can have carrots and you can have sticks. And obviously, in the brief comments from last week at the ALI, there was not any sort of detail about this. And so what are we really saying the consequences would be? Are we going to suspend people's law licenses? Are we going to make them do more pro bono? Are they going to have to go to training? Are they going to have to pay a fine? We could kind of brainstorm all of this, but an interesting academic and philosophical discussion.
Definitely.
And I'm thinking that maybe we could transition to some different hot takes, which are, before we realistically think about a world of mandatory, or a kinder term, maybe universal pro bono, let's think about some other bold steps that we could take, and whether that could help us advance the cause of access to justice. So one that admittedly is wacky, but I think could be impactful, is this idea of voluntary plus pro bono. And I think it's taking a page out of behavioral economists and behavioral psychologists, and it's thinking about, do you have to opt into something, or do you have to opt out of something, and how that triggers participation. And if you read or think about retirement savings, I don't know, Eva, if you remember this, but it used to be for every 401k or retirement plan, an employee had to sign up, right?
Yes.
You have to opt in.
Right.
And enrollment rates were relatively low. People weren't saving. And so behavioral economists said, okay, we need to change that. Instead of the default being an opt-in, we need to basically have everyone included unless you want to opt out, right? And we're seeing this with some voter registration states, right? Where they say, okay, when you turn 18, you're just going to automatically be enrolled unless you want to opt out.
Right.
And by making the affirmative action an opt-out rather than an opt-in, participation rates go up.
Yeah.
So can we do that with pro bono,
It
right?
makes so much sense,
When everyone is newly admitted to the bar, you're automatically on the volunteer roll, right? You are opted in to the pro bono landscape unless you affirmatively want to opt out. And that would trigger a really new way to look at and streamline and make more efficient ways to distribute pro bono work, right? And arguably more resources. But think how that could change the landscape of potential pro bono lawyers ready and able to volunteer. So something like that might be worth trying, right? In maybe a small pilot project and see what that does. Another demographic where mandatory, to use the M word, pro bono might make sense, is with law students.
Yes, absolutely.
And so Eva, what do you think? As a soon-to-be law student yourself, do you think that it has any legs?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I definitely do. It makes a lot of sense to me. Among the many different requirements that law students face, why not have a pro bono requirement? I think it fits in perfectly. It's also, we've heard time and time again that if you expose young lawyers to pro bono early on in their careers during law school, they're more likely to continue it later on in their life and have a really passionate, deep commitment to pro bono throughout their careers. It raises their awareness of issues that low-income people face. Many students might come to law school just to have no idea what's out there, and kind of having this direct engagement with clients, it can really change their outlook on legal services and what they should be doing in their careers later on. And also, in a practical standpoint, it provides great professional development for law students. It provides them a chance to kind of have one-on-one client contact, and gives them a chance to draft documents, do negotiations. They're getting all of this professional development experience that they wouldn't otherwise get necessarily. So,
within a structure, right? We're not just having people be free agents to go find their own opportunities, and the burden then isn't really on the legal services organizations. Yes, it's on the law schools, but they can figure out as they are working on clinical legal education, expanding experiential education opportunities, how to have structure, right? And oversight and training, support, supervision, all things that are really important to making this work. And as law schools are continually rethinking, right, given the marketplace and demographics and the economics of the profession, it's a live lab, right? For thinking how we can better inculcate pro bono into the next generation of lawyers.
Yeah, and especially if associates take that, law firms take this kind of commitment to pro bono, that can have an upward effect on their senior attorneys that they work with. So if you kind of bring it in from the bottom up.
Totally. We think about pro bono being top down and bottom up. And I think this has been as someone with gray hair who's now been around for a long time, this has been a really big sea change, right? In terms of young lawyers, recruits, law students, and junior associates feeling comfortable.
Yeah.
Basically demanding pro bono opportunities, right? From being scared 20 plus years ago to being branded as not a true law firm lawyer, right? If I mention pro bono, they're going to think I'm a poser and I'm really just, a public interest lawyer here, to totally acceptable and saying, this is important to me. And this is how I'm going to make decisions about where I'm going to work and the type of firm that I want to be at. And not only do I want it to be on your website and in your marketing materials, but I want to know that there are opportunities, meaningful opportunities for me and my colleagues to do pro bono at the firm. So that's an exciting development. And you would think it would only keep going.
I know,
right?
definitely.
And people would bring expertise. I mean, if you... Once you go off, let's just as a hypothetical, not so hypothetical, decide I'm going to spend, my time helping survivors of domestic violence, and I will have really figured out what their legal issues are and how best to serve them. Well, when you get to the firm, you'll be an expert, and just because you're a first-year associate doesn't mean you don't have substantive expertise. Right. And not only will you be ready to hit the ground running and do pro bono work in this area, you'll be able to supervise people. You'll be a resource. You will help be a center of excellence, at your firm, because you will have developed subject matter expertise. And that's really one of the places that the legal world is going, valuing all kinds of expertise.
Exactly, yeah.
So a couple other hot takes and things that we could be doing to increase the value and the visibility of pro bono short of a mandate.
Right.
How about pro bono as a criteria for leadership? If you are going to be a lawyer in a leadership position, the bench, public office, a bar association board, or other position, shouldn't you have constantly undertaken pro bono and have a personal track record?
Yeah.
It's sort of a requirement without being a global mandate.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, definitely.
Let's see how that would work.
Right.
Let's take another look at Model Rule 6.1. This is generally where pro bono is defined for the American lawyer profession writ large, but we need to look at whether it's too broad and whether the focus is tied as it should be to legal work on behalf of low income and disadvantaged clients.
Right.
Let's look at all the players in the legal economy and make sure they're able to have skin in the pro bono game. So bar associations, courts, access to justice commissions, in-house legal departments, legal services organizations, funders, faith-based groups. We all have to be there. We all have to be at the table. We all have to be talking. We all have to show our support, again, in terms of funding for legal services organizations. We've done a good job, and there are groups operating, Voices for Civil Justice comes to mind, right? Raising the visibility of the problem and educating the public. And time again, we see that it's not necessarily opposition, it's just ignorance, right? People have no idea.
Yeah.
So
lack of awareness.
It's education, it's awareness, it's raising the visibility. Let's talk about pro bono reporting, because often we're asked, right, please send us information about where pro bono is mandatory. And we'll be like, do you mean mandatory reporting?
Yeah.
And I think that, people get a little bit confused about the lay of the land. We need to make sure that reporting is meaningful and that we as a community are looking at the data that we're getting, we're assessing it, and we're making evidence-based decisions. So I think the New York experiment is a good example, right? Where, and we've talked and we've written about it, and I think it was part of our Esther tribute, right?
It was,
we included her opining at the time when New York adopted a 50-hour rule for admission to the bar. So again, mandatory
Right.
for a certain segment of the demographic.
Exactly, yeah.
They put resources into how to implement it. And now we're starting to have sort of year over year, we should be able to have data.
Yes,
Right?
yeah.
How many newly admitted lawyers, how much pro bono are they doing, what kind of pro bono are they doing? We need to look at this
Yes.
and see what's working, see what the law schools think, who have now had to get pro
Right.
bono, right,
Yeah, I'm
for
curious, yeah.
students. We have to look at what the individual young lawyers think. We have to look at what the legal services providers in New York and elsewhere
Exactly,
think
yeah.
of having, sort of had to scale up to provide this. And what can we learn from that? And that will inform decision-making going forward. Triage and simplification. We're never going to have a lawyer for everyone, for all purposes.
Right.
And it may be that everyone does not need a lawyer for all purposes. So we need to see, what can we really do? How are we diagnosing clients' legal problems? And how can we best and in the least costly legal intervention possible get people what they need?
Yep.
So there's tremendous progress on that front, looking at unbundled legal services, looking at mediation and negotiation, looking at beefing up assistance for pro se individuals, court-based
Right.
assistance centers, using technology
Yeah.
to help people. All options are on the table, but I think everyone will agree that our legal system is too complex. It's too adversarial. It's too time intensive. It's too expensive. So what fixes can we make that would make the system
Yes.
function better and more appropriately, for everyone? And again, with sort of evidence-based experiments, how New York has an experiment with the navigators, Washington State has an
Yep.
experiment with training non-lawyers to provide certain levels of assistance. What are we learning?
I know, those are two good examples.
Right? So is that working? What's working? What's not working?
Right.
Who's threatened by it? Is it valid? Let's do some analysis.
Yes, exactly.
And have some
Take a hard look,
informed
yeah.
based decision making. We write and think a lot about collaboration.
Yes. Oh,
Right?
yes.
How can we do more together? Let's keep focusing on that. Let's bring more people to the table. I think in this discussion, if you just kind of look at the internet and read what people have written, is hyper-focused on individual representation. And that's critically, critically important. But what can we do in terms of system reform to make things work better for everyone? So when there are systemic fixes that can have a big impact, are we spending enough time and energy looking at that? And our individual work can inform our systemic work. And both sides are critically important.
Yes, absolutely.
And go hand in hand. So I think those are just some examples of novel, obvious but unimplemented, and somewhat off the wall and wacky suggestions that we might look at further to improve access to justice before we touch the third rail of the M word.
Yes, definitely. Great. Well, I think that wraps things up. One other side note is that we, as we've previously mentioned, will be having more mailbag episodes. So please send us your questions or comments or concerns, anything. Just feel free to send it to us at probono@probonoinst.org.
Yeah, and this is a great topic to write in about,
Yes,
right?
please
Mandatory
do.
pro bono, what do you think? Or
Yes.
any of the suggestions that we've quickly run through today.
Yeah.
And what others do you have? We barely got to the tip of the iceberg
Oh, I know.
here,
There's so much to cover.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Great. Thanks for joining us.